Good morning, guys. Good to see everybody here today. We're about halfway through the month of July now, so we're getting awful close. I think some of you, this might be your last week staying at home for your summer vacation. I think at least a couple of you are going to be heading back to school next week. So here we're getting ready to wind down our summer break, and it's been a weird one, hasn't it, with all of the staying home and the COVID stuff and not being able to be here at church and Bible school getting postponed and all these things going on. It's just been such a weird summer, but here we are trying to get back right here at the end toward our getting back in our school year and everything. So hopefully you guys heard this week how things are going to be going for you when you start back, what days you're going to be going on and all that kind of stuff. So really good to see you this morning. Good to see that things are, at least that we're making an effort to try to get things back to normal. But we need to just keep praying for one another, be praying for our schools. I want you guys to be able to get into class and be able to see your teachers and your friends and things like that. It's really important. It's important for the way your mind develops. It's important for the way your emotions and your feelings develop, to be around a bunch of other kids. But we got some things standing in our way. So we need to all be praying. Moms and dads and kids and pastors and everybody else. We need to be praying that God will continue to bless and people will be healed of the COVID, and that the numbers will continue to go down so we can get back into school and get back to seeing everybody again, including here at the church. So please just stay diligent with that and try every chance you get, every meal that you sit down with your family, when you get up in the morning, when you're going to bed at night, all these times that we set aside for prayer. Please be praying that God will just continue to bless and heal through this so we can all get back together again. So if you're with us here at the church this morning, you guys have got your activity packets that we've started putting together for you. So you've got some crossword puzzles and some word searches and things like that. So when you get done listening to the lesson this morning, just go ahead and pick that up and start working with it so that we're not disturbing anything and everybody can pay attention to Jordan and what he's saying. So that we can make sure that everybody is clear on the message this morning. So you guys have got both things this morning, your activity packets and the lesson as well. All right. So we are going to be in Acts chapter 18 this morning, and we've just got a little bit left. We've got, about 10 more chapters left through Acts, and we're going to go through those kind of quick. So we should be getting ready to wind up the book of Acts here in the next little bit. I'm getting closer, a lot closer to where we started the course. And then once we get done with the book of Acts, Lord willing, we're going to start in on just teaching some words that I've found throughout the Bible that I think it's important that you guys know about, that you understand what those words mean, so that when you hear them, words like commandment. We big people, we take for granted that you guys know what a commandment is. And some of you that are little, it's just a word that you might have heard, the 10 Commandments, things like that. But to really know what that word means and what it means in the Scriptures, that's the kind of thing we're going to start going into once we finish up in Acts. There's some of these very important words that you need to know. Commandment, holy, glory, righteous, all of these just, those kinds of words that you guys are going to really need to understand as you're growing and getting into the Scriptures and those kinds of things. So that's the plan when we get done with Acts. That's what I'm starting to put together now for you. So hopefully we'll be back in the classroom when we get into that part of our learning. But in the meantime, we're going to pick up this morning in Acts chapter 18. All right, so let's open in prayer and then we'll get into the lesson. Lord Jesus, we thank you for letting us be here this morning. We thank you for everybody that is here. We thank you for watching over folks as they've been traveling and visiting and vacation and things like that. And we're all starting to wind that down and get back together. We're just so thankful that everybody's able to be here this morning. Please bless this lesson. Help me, Lord, just to teach your word in a way that the kids can understand it and know what's going on and imagine in their mind these things that Paul is going through and the work that he's doing and how diligent he is in just every day trying to serve you and do his very best. And I just pray, Lord, that you would take these things and that they would just help us to have a hunger and a desire to do the same thing for you in our own lives. When we get back to school, that we'll be praying for our friends and praying for our teachers and just talking to people and sharing with them about you, and that you will just be the most important thing in our life every day as we go to work and we go to school and all these places. Please just continue to help us to follow His example and the example that you set through other men and women in the Scriptures. And we thank you and we praise you for being with us. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so Paul, when we finished up last week, he had been in Athens. Remember that Athens is this humongous city where everybody's supposed to be really smart, very intelligent, very educated. It's where all of the most educated people in the world, in Europe at that time, would have been there in Athens. And so Paul comes into that city, and he is expecting to find people who have kind of figured some things out, who have looked around and observed the world and observed the stars and different things in nature and observed people and are beginning to understand how human beings behave and how the world is. But he's very disappointed because he gets there and he sees a bunch of people who are very superstitious, and they're serving all of these different gods in hopes that one of them might be the right God. And Paul began to teach the very intelligent, very well-educated people that there is only one God. And He's the God who created everything. And he begins to speak to them and help them understand about this God that they had called the unknown God. And Paul spends just a little bit of time there in Athens. And very shortly after he begins to preach there, he's forced out again. And he has to go on down to the next big city, going down the road. And this place, that's what we're going to talk about this morning, is called Corinth. 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 And so when he gets to Corinth, it's another great big city, but Paul is not surprised at what he finds here. In fact, the city of Corinth had a very bad reputation. A lot of people knew about it. It was a humongous city. A lot of people knew about it, but nobody knew anything good about Corinth. It's a very evil place. It's a very mean place. And if you figured out a pattern here, there's a lot of places that Paul goes that are evil places, that are mean places, where there's just a lot of bad things going on, where people are abusive, where people are doing things they're not supposed to do, they're cheats, they're murderers, all this. Because let me tell you something, guys. You look around where we live today, in East Tennessee, in America, we have it really, really good. We have it probably better than anyone has ever had it in the history of the entire earth, as far as how safe we are, as far as how well people obey the law, as far as how well people behave toward one another. Because back in this time when Paul was alive, when you went into these cities, there were no police. There was an army. There would have been like a few magistrates, is what they would have called it, which would have been kind of like a sheriff or some deputies, but nothing like what we have today. And so it was a very unsafe place to be, especially for women, especially for children, or for people who were sick or weak. I mean, you basically had to just defend yourself everywhere you went. And if you couldn't defend yourself, people could hurt you, could take advantage of you and things like that. And so Paul comes into this city called Corinth, and it's one of the worst in the whole world. And when Paul looks around this city, he gets very discouraged at what he sees. In fact, some of the other letters that Paul wrote, he wrote while he was in Corinth. He's in this city when he writes about them, and when you listen to the way Paul writes those other letters, like the letter to the Romans, Paul's looking around this city of Corinth as he's describing people, as he's describing human beings and the way our hearts work and the way our minds work. And he says, we are the worst creatures there could be. And he describes people who are rebels, who have rebelled against God, who have done everything they can against God, who are criminals against God. That's how he describes every one of us. And he sees that when he's looking at these folks in Corinth. So he comes into this city. He's alone again. Nobody's with him. He's left Athens. He's come down to Corinth. And he looks around and he is so discouraged again. But for a different reason. Because Paul sees all of the sin. He sees all of the evil and the nastiness and the meanness in Corinth. and he thinks, I am completely alone here. I know the truth. I know what can heal people, what can make people better, what can help them to overcome these things, but I'm the only one, and who's going to listen to me? Who is going to have anything to do with me when I come into this place? Who's going to believe me? Who's going to even carry on a conversation with me? And he starts to get really down on himself again. And do you see a pattern that's happening here? I know you guys run into this sometimes. You feel this. I know it from talking to you and from being around you, that sometimes you feel like you're just the only person in the world, and that everything that could possibly happen that would be bad is happening to you, and it's only happening to you, and everybody else is having a great day, and you're having just an Eeyore rain cloud kind of day. And I've sat down and talked to some of you guys when you were having one of those days, and I'll tell you, it's pitiful. It's pitiful, and I feel terrible for you when you're having those days. But even somebody as great as the Apostle Paul had those days all the time. And when he wrote letters to some of his friends, he would say things to them like, I feel crushed. I feel like I'm just, the whole world is coming down on top of me, but I'm always rejoicing. I'm never giving up. I just feel like everything's going against me, but even while everything's going against me, I'm rejoicing. I have joy in my heart. Because see, joy does not have anything to do with our circumstances. It has nothing to do with necessarily what's going on around us. Happiness is about feeling good in whatever situation we're in. That the situation is what's making us happy. So having a big bowl of ice cream will make you happy, but it doesn't necessarily put joy in your heart. Joy is about something that's in your heart that makes you feel good no matter what's going on. And so Paul has these just over and over again. Everywhere he goes, he just gets so discouraged, especially at this time in his ministry, because he's still learning how to rejoice in all of these negative things. So he gets here in Corinth. He's looking around. It's just overwhelming. It's just like a big flood. All of the things that are going to go against him, and all the sin and the meanness that he sees everywhere. But God was right there with him. We're going to talk about that a little bit further. But here's the thing. God knows the situations that we get in. So there's several things that God does for us that helps us, that encourages us. And do you remember what it means to be encouraged? Think back to when we studied on Joshua. And God said, be of good courage. Take courage. He said those things over and over to Joshua. Take courage. Where do we take courage? What does that mean, to take courage? It means to be courageous in our heart. And so when we get encouraged, that's when courage is put into us. When God gives us boldness and gives us bravery to be able to stand up and to keep going in these things. And God uses several things over and over again throughout the Scriptures and different people's lives, and we experience this all the time. He uses several things to encourage us. So we're going to look at some of the things that God used to encourage Paul when he gets here to Corinth. And the very first thing that God does is he says, Paul, I'm not going to leave you alone this time. Remember that when he was in Athens, he comes into the city and he's there for several days and he's all by himself. And he's wandering around through the marketplace and he's going to the different churches and he's going to all these temples. He's looking at all of these things, but he's completely by himself. God says, you're not going to be by yourself in this city. So right off the bat, he gets into the city and it says he found a certain Jew named Aquila. Now that's a man, okay? That's a man's name, Aquila, who is from Pontus, and that's a place back near where Paul grew up. So it's not quite in Jerusalem or in Israel, but it's very close. It's back over where like present-day Turkey is at. So he's from Pontus. He had just come from Italy or Rome with his wife Priscilla. All right, so we got two people. So let's keep these names in our mind. The man's name is Aquila, and his wife's name is Priscilla. Aquila and Priscilla. And we're going to find their names several more times. They are very important in the Scriptures. And these folks, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here a little bit. These folks were of the same job that Paul had. Now wait a minute. I thought Paul was a preacher. And then what Paul is, he's like the Apostle Paul. He's one of the apostles. That's his job, right? But see, we learned something new about Paul. It turns out that Paul is what we call, what's translated in the Bible, a tent maker. Okay, so when you talk about somebody being a tent maker, it's like talking about Jesus. Does anybody remember what Jesus' job was? I'm gonna give you just a second to think about that. What was Jesus' job? He was a carpenter, right? So those of you that remember that Jesus is a carpenter, you're exactly right. But Jesus didn't just work with wood. He worked with wood, he worked with stone, he worked with metal. He was a builder. So it's translated carpenter, but it means he's a builder. So he works with all sorts of building materials, all sorts of tools. And that was Jesus' occupation. That's what his job was, to make money. Well, Paul is called a tent maker, but really he works with leather. Right? So anything leather, so he could make tents, he could make bags, he could make belts, he could make slings like what David would have used. He could make just anything like that would use leather or animal skins that you would stretch and dry out and turn into something. Paul could do any of those things. And Paul was a very hard worker while he was in Corinth. We know that because later on he writes a letter back to the Corinthians, and he reminds them. He says, I worked night and day so that I would not have to ask you guys for any food, for any housing, nothing like that. Okay, so Paul is the whole time he's in Corinth, he's a very hard worker at his occupation of making tents and belts and things like that with leather. So the very first thing that God does is he sends Aquila and Priscilla, who are two people who like the same things that Paul likes. As far as we can tell, they're probably Christians. They're believers even before Paul meets them. They're Jewish, but they're also believers, come from Italy. And we're going to learn that later on. We're going to see some other places where they interact with people. And it's a pretty fair bet that these folks are already Christians. So Paul runs into these two people who he makes very quick friends with because they're of the same trade, same job, and they're believers. So God doesn't leave Paul by himself. He encourages him by giving him friends who love him and who think like him, who enjoy the same things as him. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I know that whenever I got to this point in my year, I always got super nervous. Because I didn't know if there would be anybody in my class when I got back to school that I would know. Any of my friends. I mean, I knew like everybody that was in my grade. So when I was in the 5th grade at Friendsville, I knew the people that were in my grade, but I still had some people who were just my really good friends. A lot of people I knew, but some people are my really good friends. And I would always be super nervous about whether my friends were going to be in my class with me. And I was always nervous about who my teacher was going to be and who my teacher was not going to be. And all of those kinds of things. And so I know you guys are probably dealing with that, where you're nervous and you're worried, especially when we're doing these staggered days. Because what if you get to school, what if you go to school on Monday and Wednesday, and your very best friend goes to school on Tuesday and Thursday? Well, you're not even going to see them walking down the hallway, right? So here's a good friend that it'd be one thing if they were in another class, you at least got to see each other in the hallway or at lunch or whatever, but there's a chance that you may not even be able to see them. And so it can be very nervous for us. But here's what we know. God already knows exactly who's going to be in your class. He already knows exactly who you need to run into and who you need to become friends with this year, and He's going to take care of that. He's going to give you the people that will put courage in your heart for the whole school year. He's going to give you the people who are going to be right there with you in everything that you've got to go through this year. It may not be who you had last year, but God's going to put people in your class, at your table at lunch, however it's going to end up being, and it's going to be the exact people that you need. So I want you to put courage in your heart knowing that God is watching over these things. All right, so the very first thing He does is He gives Paul Aquila and Priscilla to be there with him. The second thing he does, and this is important, he gives him work to do. Right? So if Paul says, I worked both night and day to make sure that I had plenty of money to buy food, to take care of my housing, all of those things so that I was not chargeable to the church. I didn't have to ask the church to take care of me. If he's doing that, then that means that there's a great demand for what he does there in Corinth. And I'll tell you, my own self, I have found this to be some of the most encouraging time in my life. It's when I have a whole bunch to do. Now some people, and maybe not everybody sees it the same way I do. Some people, they sit and they bring out their to-do list and they write down everything that they need to get done, and there's 50 things on that to-do list, and they look at it and they just are so overwhelmed. They're just so struck by all the things on their to-do list, they just want to give up. And it's so much pressure, and it just brings so much anxiety to see all that stuff. That ain't how I act. That ain't how Paul acted, I don't think. I think Paul was the kind of guy that, man, when he had a whole lot to do, it encouraged him. It kept him busy, and he was the kind of person who wanted to be busy and working all the time. And so for some of us, this is the best thing that can possibly happen, is that we don't have idle time. Now, idle means not like an idol that you worship, but time that we're not doing anything. I hate time that I'm not doing anything, because here's what happens. When I have time where I'm idle, where I'm not doing anything, my mind begins to open up to things that it doesn't need to be paying attention to. Right? So if I'm focused on work, if I'm focused on doing something, some task, it could be even, reading a book, reading my Bible, or doing something. You guys know at my house, I've always got stuff going on, whether it be working on fence, working on a barn, or working with animals, or whatever. When I'm at my job, I always want to be busy, because if I'm not busy, I'm going to start thinking about how to cause trouble. I'm going to start thinking about things that I don't need to be thinking about, and my mind begins to wander after those. And it's like a sheep being out in a field, right? And a sheep that's out in the field, and the shepherd has brought a big bale of hay, and he puts it down in the middle of the sheep, and all the sheep come over, and they get around this bale of hay, and they all start to eat on this bale of hay. Are they going to wander off? No, because they're all right there in one place, and everybody's focused on this bale of hay. But if the shepherd doesn't do that, if the shepherd just turns the sheep out in the field, and they get to go out and start eating wherever they want to, then what are they going to do? They're going to take a little bite here. They're going to take a little bite here. And then they're going to take a little bite here. And all of a sudden, they're gone. They're off the camera. They're out of the field. And they've wandered off somewhere that they're not supposed to be. So one of the most encouraging things that we can do is make sure that our mind and our body is always staying busy. And here I'm going to give you a couple of things I encourage you to do that will kind of help you out with this. Now think about what kind of songs you listen to. Think about what kind of music you listen to, whether it be in your car, whether it be at your house. Most of you have got some sort of a cell phone or something like that where you can listen to music all the time. What kind of songs do you listen to? Because whatever kind of songs you listen to, that's the words that are going to be running through your head all the time. So if you're listening to songs about, let's just think about the kind of songs that are on the radio. If you're listening to songs that talk about drinking beer and drinking alcohol, I know you guys are young, but this is what's on the radio. So if you're listening to those, or you're listening about songs where it's about boys chasing girls or girls chasing boys, guess what's going to be on your mind all the time? Boys chasing girls and girls chasing boys and drinking alcohol even when you're 8 and 9 years old. So I'm going to go out on a limb, and I hope that mom and dad are listening right now, and listen to what I'm saying to you. What you listen to on the radio is what's going to go into your kid's head. It's what they're going to think about when they're 12 years old. So if you want your sons to think about chasing after girls, keep listening to that on your radio. If you want your girls to think about chasing boys, listen to that on your radio. Or we can make really good decisions, and we can flip it over to 88.3 or 92.7 or 89.1, we can find words that are rejoicing and lifting up Jesus Christ. And lo and behold, guess what's going to be in our head all day? Every time we get an idle thought in our head, it's going to be lyrics to something if we're listening to music all the time. Today, this very day today, my whole day today, the only words that have run through my mind today are the words, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. No, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. You know why? Because that's the song I listened to this morning. And I can't get that song in my head, and I'm so glad that I can't. Everywhere I've been today, that's all I've been singing. That's all I've been saying. Because I took a big bale of Jesus hay and I put it in front of me so that my mind is completely focused on doing that, on listening to that, on singing that. So I'm telling you, if you're a little kid, now listen to what I'm saying. If you're a little kid, when you get in your car, tell your mother to put the radio on Jesus music, on Christian music. Find it. I'll help them find the station if they'll text me. But put the words that you need in your head. Keep your mind busy on things that are good, on things that are pure, on things that are holy, on Jesus. And keep that focus everywhere you go. And I promise you, it will encourage you even at times when there's no music playing. Keeping our mind busy, keeping that, and that's one. I'm just going to leave that one because if you'll do that, I promise you it'll have a big effect. There's 50 other things I could recommend to you, but let's just work on one. So this week, let's put our radio, every time we're in the car, let's put our radio on Christian music and listen to things that encourage. Once you guys get that down, then we'll talk about other things that you can be plugging in so that your mind and your body are always staying busy. Because if you're staying busy, you're going to be encouraged, you're going to be lifted up if you're focusing on these things that can keep you active. All right. So number one, God encourages Paul by sending him friends. Sending him people who are like-minded with him, who can encourage him and be around him and lift him up. Number two, he keeps him busy. He gives him work to do and encourages him by keeping his mind busy, by keeping his hands and his body busy so that he's always, he just keeps moving forward and he's staying focused on something and not wandering off like some sheep that's just eating a bite of grass as it wanders off into the wilderness, okay? The number three thing he does, so one, he stays busy with his tent making. The other thing, just like he's always done, he goes into the synagogue every Sabbath and he talks to the Jews and the Greeks. He's talking to them about Christ, just like he's done in every city he's ever gone into. And they hate it. They hate it so badly that they actually end up, it says that they blasphemed. It means that they basically said, you are talking for Satan. You are not coming from God. Everything you've told us, this Jesus must be a demon. Now that's pretty serious. Nobody up to this point has been that bold in what they've said against Christ. But these folks are so angry with Paul for what he's saying that they blaspheme and they take what Jesus has done and they give Satan credit for it. And they say, if Jesus walked on water, it's because Satan let him walk on water. If Jesus raised from the dead, it's because Satan raised him from the dead. He cannot be the Christ. He cannot be the Messiah. And Paul is so aggravated at them that they've gone that far that it says he shook his clothes. So he does this. So now remember back then that everybody's dusty and everything because they've been out walking around. And so it's like he beats his shirt and he beats the dust off of his shirt and he shakes it all out on the ground. And he says, I'm done with you. I will not have anything to do with you all anymore. From this point on, I'm not bothering with you. I'm going to the Gentiles. I'm going to the people in this city who might actually hear the news of Jesus Christ and rejoice in it. You had your chance and I'm gone. And so he leaves the synagogue, he leaves the church there, and as soon as he walks out, lo and behold, the first house he comes to, it's right next door to the church. So you guys think about our church where we're at. If you walked out the front door, you guys know over right outside or on the other side of the basketball goal is where Miss Ann lives. Right? So it would be like that close. So it's like he walked out of the church. He says, I'm done with you all here in this church. And he walked out the front door, and the first house he goes to, right where Miss Ann's house is, he walks up to that house. He walks in, and the guy's name is Justus. He is not a Jew, but he's someone who believes God. He studied the Old Testament. He studied the Bible. He is a believer in God. And Paul walks in, and he begins to talk to him, and guess what happens to that man? He gets saved. That quick. He gets saved. And then guess what happens after that? Paul is there at Justus's house. The people there that are in Justus's house, they accept Jesus. They get saved. Their life is turned around. And while Paul is sitting there, guess who walks in the door? The pastor of the church. His name's Crispus. And when Paul walks out of the church and he says, I'm done with you all. I'm going over here to these other people, these Gentiles. Crispus walks out the door behind him and walks over and says, Paul, I believe you. Now that's pretty significant. That's pretty huge. That the pastor of the church hears what Paul has to say, and while everybody else in the church are saying, Satan is who raised Jesus from the dead, the pastor says, no, there's something about this. I believe you, Paul. I believe what you're saying. And Crispus walks right over to where Justus is at. He finds Paul, and he says, Paul, tell me more about Jesus. And not only does Crispus get saved, not only does Crispus become a disciple of Jesus Christ, his whole household does. His wife, his kids, if he's got grandkids, and he probably did, he probably would have been old enough, if he's the pastor of the synagogue there, of the church, he would have had many people in his household. His whole household gets saved. When we are faithful to God, when we are faithful to the Bible, even though things looks like they're just completely falling apart around us and we just want to give up, God always seems to send that little bit of hope that says, what you're doing matters. Be faithful. Look, it's working. It's working. Now that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we get into situations where it just seems like we're going for years and nothing positive is coming out. Or there may not be anything that is just a big billboard of excitement. But even at times when nobody seems to be listening to us, God still sends little things, little circumstances, little events that are an encouragement to us. And that's what he did here to Paul. He says, Paul, don't be discouraged. Look, not everybody's listening to you. Some people hate you. Some people revile you. But there are some people who are listening. Keep after it. Keep being faithful. And that's what may happen for some of you guys this year. You're going to get into your class. You're going to be doing everything right. You're going to be listening to your teacher. You're going to be trying to serve and be faithful. You're going to be kind to people. And folks are not going to like how you're kind to everybody. They'll want you to be kind to them, but want you to be mean to somebody else. And so you're going to try to be nice and kind to everybody. And people are going to not like that you're nice to everyone. They're going to like that you're not nice to the people that they don't like. But you stay faithful in it. You continue to be kind and loving to every person. To the kids who are mean, to the kids that are rude, to the kids that are pleasant, to the kids that are loving, to the kids that play ball with you, to the kids that talk to you, to the kids that don't talk to you. All of them. No exceptions. Nobody deserves for you to be unkind to them. You're kind to every person. You're loving to every person. And no matter how hard it gets, you keep doing that. And God will send you those little experiences, those little events that just encourage you. And nobody else may even see it. But it's just you know that that's God doing it. And He'll send those things to you. Somebody's telling you thank you. Somebody telling you, being kind back to you. Somebody that's never been kind to you before in their whole life. And all of a sudden, something changes a little bit. And you start to see that maybe there's just a little glimmer of love in that person. God will send those things. All right, the fourth one. This is the last one. Paul is preaching. He's doing all of these things. He's staying busy. He's got his friends with him now. So now he's got Aquila and Priscilla and Justus and Crispus and the church is starting. They're starting to be believers in Corinth. But guess what happens every time there's believers in a city? What happens? The Jews rise up, they go after Paul, they'll stone him, they'll have him arrested, they'll cause a riot, all these things. And Paul sees these things getting ready to happen again, and he's really nervous. And he's like, okay, I guess I need to pack up all my bags and get ready to go. So as soon as they start to riot, I can run. And guess what happens? God Himself, Jesus Himself, comes to Paul. And He speaks to Paul, and He says, Paul, it's Jesus. Don't stop. Keep going. There will be no riots here. There will be nothing. Nobody's going to stone you. Nobody's going to arrest you. Nobody is going to run you out of town. You keep preaching. Unpack your bags. Put all your stuff back in the drawers. Put your suitcase back under the bed. You just keep going. I have many people in this city. Does that mean the church was already there? No. What Jesus is saying is there's a lot of people here who are going to believe you. You keep preaching hard. You keep preaching strong. You keep preaching kindly. You keep telling them about me, and you're going to see some great things. This is the place, Paul. This is the one you've been looking for. An explosion of Christians are coming. It is coming. And sure enough, Paul stayed in that city for nearly 2 years. Every single day. He's working with his leather. He's working at his job. He's loving on his friends. He's being kind to everybody he comes in contact with. He's preaching, and there are people being saved on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and the next week and the next week. And every day there are people in this mean, horrible, evil city who hear about Jesus, who hear about how Jesus loves them, who hear about how Jesus died for them, who hear about how Jesus is standing in for them, that they can be right with God, that they can make everything better with God because Jesus died. They hear that and they believe, and the church explodes. So it becomes one of the biggest churches in the entire world, in this city of Corinth. And Paul is there for 2 years. And it's just encouragement after encouragement after encouragement. Even though all of this evil is going on, Paul has joy. Maybe not happiness. There were bad days. There were days when he got down, but he has joy. Because he looks around and he sees all of these positives happening over and over again. And finally, Paul has gotten to a place where he's not being run out of town. He's not being arrested. He's not being beaten. He's getting to stay and preach and see people come to believe Jesus. Not just believe in Jesus. Not believe that there is a Jesus. They're believing Jesus. They're trusting Jesus. And they're asking Him to forgive them of their sins. And they're asking Him to be their Lord, to take care of them, to be their master, that they can learn from Him, that they can serve Him, that He'll be their teacher so that they can understand the way they're supposed to live. People are trusting Jesus because Paul has been faithful. And there's nothing more encouraging than seeing people begin to trust Jesus. That's what keeps Jordan and me going, is because we see just every now and then, we see somebody come along who trusts Jesus. And man, no matter how bad it's got, we just want to keep going when that happens. And Jesus says to him, Paul, I'm always going to be with you. No matter what goes on, I'm right here. He doesn't just say, and I'm going to read this one to you. It says in verse 9, Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision. And He says, Be not afraid, but speak and hold not thy peace. Meaning, don't back off, Paul. You just keep going. He says, Be not afraid, for I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. Nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to be mean to you, Paul, because I am with you. Not just I'm thinking about you, not just I love you, Paul, but that means Jesus was right there beside him. Who's going to hurt you when the creator of the entire universe is right there beside you? And he's always right there. Nobody can hurt you. Nobody can kill you. Nobody can get you down. People can be mean to you. They can. But when Jesus is sitting right there beside you, man, that's where that joy comes from. When you guys get to school next week, you may think, this has got to be the worst year I've ever had. This is going to be a disaster. It can't be. It can't be if Jesus is right there beside you through every bit of it. And so he comes to Paul and he says, don't you worry, Paul. I am with thee. And there are no greater 4 words in the entire Bible. You read it cover to cover. There's nothing more encouraging. Nothing puts bravery in your heart. Nothing puts joy in your heart like these 4 words. I am with thee. When Jesus says that to you, COVID don't mean anything. 6th grade don't mean anything. 4th grade don't mean anything. I am with thee gets you through anything you have to face. Disease, tragedy, unkindness, meanness, fear, anxiety, death. I am with thee. Puts more courage in your heart in those 4 words than anything else. And I want you guys to remember those 4 words that Jesus spoke to Paul and that Jesus spoke to every disciple. I am with thee. That means you. That means you. He's with you. And no matter what happens this week, those 4 words will get you through whatever it is. We'll close in prayer this morning. You guys have done a great job. If you want to talk about this when we get done today, come find me and let's talk a little bit. But man, there's nothing more encouraging than hearing those 4 words from Jesus. I am with thee. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for everybody that is sitting in here with us this morning. Thank you for the message Jordan has brought. I just ask, Father, that you would just take those words and you would burn them into our mind, that they would just be stuck there and we couldn't get them out no matter what happens. Watch over everybody this week as you're getting ready to go back to school. We thank you that you have brought the healing that you have and the numbers, Lord, or where they're at. We just pray that you continue to help people to be faithful in the things that we're doing to protect ourselves. Please just let the numbers continue to come down, not just here, but all over the world, Lord, everywhere where people are battling with this disease. And let us get back, Lord, to where we can fellowship with one another, we can see one another and hug one another and love one another again. And we just thank you and praise you for all you do, Lord. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.